Los Angeles, December 1927. A well-dressed gentleman of distinguished appearance enters Mount Vernon Junior High School and introduces himself as Mr. Cooper, claiming to be an employee of First National Bank. Approaching Secretary Mary Holt, he weaves an intricate tale. Perry Parker, a respected bank employee, has suffered a severe accident and lies between life and death. With urgency in his voice, he requests the presence of one of the Parker daughters. The decision that would forever alter a family's destiny is made within minutes. Marion Parker, 12 years old, is summoned to the office, while her twin sister, Marjorie, remains in class, unaware of the unfolding tragedy. No additional verification is performed. No phone call to confirm the story. Marion simply departs from school with the stranger. Hours later, the Parker family receives the first of a series of sinister telegrams. The content is calculated and precise. $1,500 in American gold certificates must be delivered within 72 hours. The kidnapper, identifying himself as George Fox, establishes his conditions with brutal clarity. No contact with law enforcement. Absolute discretion. Non-negotiable 72-hour deadline. This sequence of seemingly straightforward events would trigger one of the most intense and disturbing criminal investigations in California's history. If you enjoy true crime cases, stay until the end of this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. On December 16, 1927, after receiving the kidnapper's demands, Perry Parker initiated one of the most critical and delicate actions of the case, preparing the ransom money. The demanded amount was $1,500 in American gold certificates, a sum that, while significant for a bank employee of the time, wasn't extraordinary, equivalent to approximately $27,000 in current values. Parker, displaying remarkable composure even amid the desperation of having his daughter kidnapped, made a crucial decision that would later prove fundamental to the investigation. He meticulously documented the serial numbers of all notes that would be delivered to the kidnapper. This action was carried out discreetly, following the criminal's instructions to maintain apparently normal daily activities. The documentation of serial numbers was an essential investigative measure, as it would allow authorities to track the money after delivery. This strategy proved particularly effective when, later, one of the $20 notes was used in a clothing store in Seattle, providing investigators with a crucial lead about the kidnapper's whereabouts. Parker's choice to record the serial numbers demonstrated a delicate balance between following the kidnapper's instructions, which demanded that no investigative measures be taken, and creating a possibility for tracking that wouldn't compromise his daughter's safety. The morning of December 17, 1927, dawned with headlines in Los Angeles newspapers that would dramatically change the course of negotiations. The press coverage of Marion Parker's kidnapping enraged the kidnapper, who responded with a series of increasingly threatening telegrams addressed to the Parker family. The messages, signed alternately as Fate and Fox, demonstrated that the criminal had detected police surveillance from the previous night. With disturbing precision, he described the two closed cars that had followed Perry Parker, evidencing his level of observation and planning. Along with the threatening telegrams, the family continued receiving notes supposedly written by Marion, pleading for cooperation with the kidnapper's demands. The decisive moment arrived at 7:15 p.m. when the telephone rang at the Parker residence. The voice on the other end of the line, later described as controlled and uniform, provided meticulous instructions for a new ransom delivery attempt. Perry Parker was to drive alone to a specific corner on Manhattan Place. At the designated location, a Chrysler approached Perry's car. The driver, partially concealed by a bandana, kept a weapon pointed. In the passenger seat, Perry glimpsed what appeared to be Marion, a motionless figure wrapped in blankets, her eyes open and fixed. When questioned about his daughter's condition, the kidnapper claimed she was merely sleeping. After the money delivery and a quick verification of the contents, the vehicle advanced a few meters to a darker area. It was then that the package was pushed out of the car. What Perry Parker discovered upon unwrapping the blanket would reveal the extent of the crime's brutality. Marion's body had been methodically mutilated. The legs had been completely removed, and the arms were cut just below the elbows. Her eyes, though open, were artificially maintained so through steel wires that kept the eyelids retracted, in a macabre attempt to simulate life. The killer had applied makeup to her cheeks to give her color and the appearance of life during the brief moment of the exchange. The abdominal cavity contained a towel with the emblem of the Bellevue Arms Apartments and a piece of men's shirt, used to fill the space where her organs had been. The body had been prepared to appear intact when wrapped in blankets, allowing the kidnapper to execute his staging during the ransom delivery. Perry's screams echoed through the street, drawing local merchants and passers-by. Within minutes, police vehicles converged on the location. Detective George Contreras, upon arriving at the scene, coordinated the start of one of the largest manhunts ever witnessed in California. The following day, the remaining parts of Marion's body would be discovered in Elysian Park, wrapped in newspapers. A discovery that would only amplify the horror of that night and the urgency of the search for the killer. The Marion Parker case, through this crucial moment, would leave an indelible mark on American criminal history. The morning of December 18, 1927, dawned with Los Angeles in a state of shock. News of Marion Parker's murder was already spreading rapidly, but no one was prepared for the additional discoveries that Sunday would hold. Around 9 p.m. the previous evening, Marion's body arrived at the morgue, where Dr. A.F. Wagner immediately began the autopsy. The situation was particularly delicate for Wagner, who had lived next door to the Parkers for 4 years and knew the family well. His initial report documented with clinical precision the condition of the body. The trunk was preserved only to an inch above the navel, and the arms remained only to the elbow joints. A 2-inch incision marked the left shoulder. The forensic examination revealed that Marion had been strangled, and all cuts were made after her death. Her internal organs, where present, were intact and healthy, indicating there had been no other physical trauma before the strangulation. The killer had filled the body cavities with a towel from the Bellevue Arms Apartments and a piece of men's shirt, evidence that would later prove crucial to the investigation. While the autopsy proceeded, the morning brought more disturbing discoveries. A man taking his morning walk in Elysian Park found 2 packages wrapped in newspaper abandoned by the roadside. Upon opening them, he encountered Marion's forearms. Within hours, investigators located the remaining body parts in a nearby ravine. The Los Angeles Police Department mobilized an unprecedented task force. More than 20,000 people, including police officers and volunteers, joined in the search for the killer. An initial reward of $450,000 was offered for the capture of the criminal, dead or alive, an amount that later increased to $500,000 with private contributions. The discovery of the towel with the Bellevue Arms emblem led investigators to the apartment complex. Police teams conducted a methodical search of each unit, interviewing residents and staff. The building's caretaker provided crucial information about a tenant who had been seen carrying suspicious packages to his car on the night of December 16th and cleaning the vehicle's seats the following day. Fear spread rapidly through the community. School attendance plummeted in the following days, with parents afraid to send their children to classes. The panic was such that the Mexican government temporarily closed its border with California to prevent the possible escape of the killer. Los Angeles newspapers saturated their pages with details of the crime, often extrapolating known facts with sensationalist speculation. Some outlets even published false information about supposed tortures and other horrors that were not confirmed by the autopsy. This exaggerated coverage only increased the climate of terror in the city. The police established blockades on all major exit routes from the city. Men resembling the suspect's description were constantly stopped and questioned. In one particularly tragic case, a man who looked like the suspect was detained 7 times in just 8 hours, eventually begging to remain in police custody for his own protection. Beyond the physical evidence found with the body, investigators managed to extract fingerprints from the car abandoned by the killer. The vehicle, discovered in a parking lot at 9th and Grand Street, had been carefully cleaned, except for the steering wheel, an oversight that would later prove fatal for the criminal. The LAPD's crime laboratory began a meticulous analysis of all collected evidence. Handwriting experts examined the letters and telegrams, forensic analysts processed the fingerprints found, and criminologists studied the crime patterns, establishing the foundations for one of the first major scientific investigations in Los Angeles police history. On December 20th, 1927, the investigation into Marion Parker's murder reached its turning point. Forensic technicians, while processing the abandoned Chrysler in a parking lot at 9th and Grand Street, discovered that the killer, despite being meticulous in his attempt to eliminate evidence, had made a crucial mistake. He forgot to clean the steering wheel. This single oversight resulted in the collection of clear fingerprints that proved fundamental to the case. The prints found on the steering wheel perfectly matched those left on the telegrams sent to the Parkers. When compared to criminal records, the fingerprints led to William Edward Hickman, a 19-year-old youth with an already significant criminal history for his age. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The killer wasn't a stranger, but someone intimately familiar with the Parker family's routine. At the First National Bank of Los Angeles, where Perry Parker worked as a teller, Hickman had been employed as a messenger. During his time at the bank, he demonstrated his criminal propensity by forging approximately $400 in checks. For this offense, he received a relatively lenient sentence, 6 months of probation. After serving his sentence, he unsuccessfully attempted to regain his position at the bank. The investigation intensified at the Bellevue Arms Apartments following the discovery of the towel with the establishment's emblem alongside Marion's body. Investigators discovered that Hickman had recently resided in the complex under the pseudonym Donald Evans. The apartment, when investigated, proved to be a crucial source of evidence. Several razor blades were found, along with stacks of newspapers reporting the kidnapping. More significantly, they discovered a partially burned memo that appeared to be a draft of the ransom demands. The building's caretaker provided vital information about Mr. Evans' suspicious activities. He witnessed the suspect carrying several packages to his car on the night of December 16th, followed by a meticulous cleaning of the vehicle's seats the next day. Details that acquired sinister significance considering the known events. Mary Holt, the school employee who unwittingly handed Marion over to the kidnapper, provided a positive identification upon seeing Hickman's photograph. Her detailed description of the man who presented himself as Mr. Cooper matched Hickman precisely. Apparent age between 25 and 30 years, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, 150 pounds, slim build, fine features, medium complexion, clean-shaven, and wavy dark brown hair. Captain James Bean of the detective squad, even in the face of substantial evidence found in the apartment, including the razor blades, newspapers, and burn drafts, initially maintained a cautious stance, declaring to the press that there was no conclusive indication that Marion Parker had been taken to that location. This statement would later be contradicted by forensic evidence. Perry Parker, upon being informed of the suspect's identity, immediately recognized the frightening familiarity of the kidnapper's voice from the telephone negotiations. However, even knowing Hickman from the bank, Perry couldn't identify any specific motive for his family being targeted. In his testimony, he stated he couldn't remember any signs of instability or desire for revenge during their previous interactions with Hickman. The investigation into Hickman's background revealed that his criminal career had begun in Kansas City, where he formed a partnership with Welby Hunt. What started with petty theft and forgery quickly escalated to armed robbery. In 1926, Hickman and Hunt left Kansas City for Los Angeles, where Hickman would secure the bank job that put him in contact with the Parkers. The manhunt that followed his identification was unprecedented in California's history. More than 20,000 people, including law enforcement officers and volunteers, mobilized in the search for Hickman. An initial reward of $450,000 was offered for his capture, dead or alive, an amount that increased to $500,000 with private contributions. The case reached such proportions that the Mexican government took the extraordinary measure of temporarily closing its border with California to prevent a possible escape. The search for Hickman generated situations of panic and confusion. A man resembling the suspect was detained 7 times in just 8 hours, eventually begging to remain in police custody for his own protection. Another lookalike was severely beaten by an enraged crowd and, tragically, after being taken to jail for his safety, ended up committing suicide. Authorities established checkpoints at all major exit routes from the city. Agents were assigned to watch train stations, bus terminals, and all possible escape points. Police in neighboring cities were alerted, and an informant network was established to monitor any suspicious movement. Investigators also followed the trail of the ransom money, whose serial numbers had been carefully recorded by Perry Parker. This precaution would prove valuable in the following days, when some notes began appearing in commercial establishments, providing crucial clues about the fugitive's movement. The press covered each development with feverish intensity, often exaggerating or distorting the facts. Some newspapers went so far as to publish sensationalist stories about supposed tortures and other horrors that were not confirmed by the autopsy. This excessive and often inaccurate coverage only increased the climate of hysteria that had settled over the city. On December 21, 1927, the investigation into Marion Parker's murder reached its turning point. In the city of Redlands, California, approximately 60 miles east of Los Angeles, police investigated a car accident whose driver, matching Hickman's description, had fled the scene. This incident marked the beginning of a trail that would lead to his capture. The next day, December 22nd, a sequence of events accelerated the pursuit. In Seattle, one of the marked $20 ransom notes was used in a clothing store. The merchant, who had seen Hickman's photographs widely circulated by the press, provided a positive identification. The fugitive had left a trail that now allowed authorities to track his movements in real time. A few hours after the Seattle incident, Hickman was spotted in Portland, Oregon. A gas station attendant recognized him during a refueling and alerted authorities, informing them that the suspect was heading toward the Columbia River Gorge. This crucial information allowed police to establish an effective search perimeter. In a desperate attempt to escape, Hickman employed various evasion tactics. He stole a car and swapped license plates from other vehicles to confuse his pursuers. However, the police net was closing in rapidly. All roads leading east from Portland were monitored by strategically positioned officers. Around 1:30 p.m. that same day, the chase came to an end. Police Chief Tom Gardini and Traffic Officer Buck Llewellyn managed to intercept and capture the fugitive. At the moment of arrest, Hickman demonstrated erratic and contradictory behavior that would characterize his subsequent confessions. His first words after capture were particularly revealing. Initially, he shouted an absurd denial. "Some demon killed her. I don't know who he is." Moments later, he completely changed his story, declaring he had committed the crime because he needed money to pay for his university studies. During his temporary detention in Oregon, Hickman elaborated a complex defense strategy. He admitted participation in the kidnapping, but tried to implicate brothers Oliver and Frank Kramer as the main perpetrators. In his initial version, he claimed to have been merely an accomplice in charge of communications with the Parker family, ransom recovery, and body delivery. The attempt to share guilt with the Kramer brothers quickly proved to be fabricated. Investigators discovered that both brothers had been imprisoned for other crimes for several months when Marion Parker was kidnapped. Hickman apparently knew the girlfriend of one of them and was familiar with their criminal histories, trying to use this knowledge to dilute his own culpability. After his extradition to Los Angeles, Hickman's facade began to crumble. Initially, he denied having committed the murder in his apartment at the Bellevue Arms, despite blood evidence found at the location. However, as interrogations progressed, he began revealing increasingly disturbing details of the crime. In a surprising development, Hickman confessed to another unrelated murder committed during a drugstore robbery. He also admitted to a series of armed robberies, significantly expanding his known criminal history. These additional confessions suggested a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in Marion's murder. The details of Marion's captivity, when finally revealed, demonstrated a level of premeditation and cruelty that shocked even the most experienced investigators. Hickman described how he kept the girl blindfolded and tied to a chair in his apartment, forcing her to write messages to her family as proof of life. The murder process, as reported by Hickman, was meticulously planned. After suffocating Marion, he hung her body upside down in the bathtub, cutting her jugular to drain the blood and minimize mess in the apartment. This calculated act of cleaning demonstrated a disturbing level of premeditation and cold-bloodedness. His most controversial claims included assertions that the victim might still have been alive during the dismemberment, an allegation that medical examiners later dismissed as impossible. Hickman described storing the body parts in a suitcase and, in an apparent act of dissociation, going to the cinema, where he claimed to have cried. The preparation of the body for the ransom delivery revealed another level of perversity. Realizing he would need to present Marion appearing alive during the exchange, Hickman devised a macabre plan. He used needle and thread to keep the girl's eyes open, applied makeup to her cheeks to simulate color, and arranged the body to appear intact when covered. In his subsequent interrogations, Hickman demonstrated a remarkable lack of remorse. He tried to minimize his victim's suffering, stating that Marion hadn't suffered, except for the brief moment of her death. He went so far as to say that he missed her parents and especially her twin sister, statements that were interpreted as yet another demonstration of his manipulative nature. The extradition process was expedited due to the crime's gravity and intense public pressure. During transport to Los Angeles, Hickman remained under heavy police escort, with authorities fearing both escape attempts and possible acts of vengeance by enraged citizens. The physical evidence against Hickman was overwhelming. Beyond the fingerprints found on the car's steering wheel and telegrams, investigators recovered bloody razors, ropes, and other materials in his apartment that corroborated his confession. The Bellevue Arms towel found with Marion's body provided the final link connecting Hickman directly to the crime. After his capture and extradition to Los Angeles, one of the most notorious judicial proceedings in California's history began. William Edward Hickman's defense adopted a bold strategy, pleading insanity. This approach was based on an elaborate narrative about the accused past and supposed childhood traumas. The defense team constructed a narrative centered on a supposedly religious fanatic grandfather who had allegedly subjected young Hickman to exorcisms during his childhood. According to the lawyers, severe repressions throughout his life had contributed to the development of homicidal ideations and violent tendencies. In an attempt to strengthen this argument, Hickman began talking about his alleged desire to study theology and become a minister of the gospel. The court appointed Dr. W.D. McNary, a respected forensic psychologist, to evaluate the defendant in prison. His conclusions were decisive. Hickman's mind was perfectly clear and organized. During the evaluations, the accused demonstrated remarkable ability to articulate stories directly and coherently, never showing signs of mental confusion. The psychologist noted that, although Hickman frequently mentioned God in his speech, he showed no real signs of insanity. During the trial, Hickman significantly altered his narrative about the crime's motivations. He abandoned initial claims about financial need for university studies and began asserting that he sought revenge for the theft episode at the bank where he had worked. Additionally, he admitted to having craved notoriety, wanting to be recognized like other killers who had gained prominence in the press. The jury, after meticulously examining all evidence and testimonies presented, categorically rejected the insanity-based defense. The decision resulted in a capital punishment sentence. Even with successive appeals that reached the California Supreme Court, the sentence was maintained. During his final months on death row, Hickman demonstrated what appeared to be a personal transformation. His conversion to Catholicism generated considerable skepticism among case observers. As part of his alleged redemption, he dedicated himself to writing apology letters not only to the Parkers, but also to the families of other victims of his previous crimes that hadn't reached the courts. For the Parkers, deeply devastated not only by Marion's loss, but by the crime's particular brutality, these late attempts to show remorse brought no consolation. The trauma of the murder was perpetuated by how Marion's body had been desecrated, an aspect of the crime that continued to haunt not just the family, but the entire community. This was the disturbing story of the Marion Parker case, which became known as the human doll due to the macabre way the killer prepared the victim's body for the ransom delivery, sewing her eyes to keep them open, applying makeup to her cheeks to simulate life, and arranging her mutilated body to appear like a life-size doll during those brief moments of exchange. This case forever changed school security protocols and left a permanent mark on American criminal history. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss any story. Your comments are very important. Tell us what you thought of this case and what other cases you'd like to see here. Until the next video,